tempest countermeasures on all of those existing and new facilities. So I encourage you all to feel free to ask questions along the way. I may have the answers, I may not. If I don't have the answers, I'll track them down for you. But this is really an opportunity to either get a different perspective or to understand the things that the feds are looking to do as we're engaged on a lot of proactive upgrade efforts with our clients across the country, and starting to see more and more of that, Brian, as folks are starting to get this message. So let me go ahead and share my screen so I'm not talking about nothing. Can you all see my screen? Okay.
Yep.
So
Good.
again, we're going to be talking about ICD 705. The ICS 705-2 is really the accreditation process behind this. And the reality is, I'm going to say it was, we're in 20, so it was around November of 22, DIA issued a memo that indicated that all existing ICD 705 facilities and previous 6-9 facilities be brought up to tempest countermeasures. No exceptions. When that word came out, you can imagine the ripple effect through the defense contracting industry was, you got to be kidding me. This is going to be billions of dollars. Once they started to get that kind of noise and feedback, they quickly retracted that memo. I don't know if you guys are aware of that memo and when it came out. They retracted it, and then they started to roll it out as early as January of last year in a retroactive upgrade, and any new facilities must have tempest countermeasures. So why is the Fed doing this? So the reality is that with our increased technology, a lot of these facilities are vulnerable. We're seeing defense contractors go wireless everywhere. And while we know that you can't go wireless in a SCIF, those spaces outside of the SCIF and 5G technology and all the IoT devices that are going into AV solutions are creating challenges and vulnerabilities overall. So these emanations can leak sensitive information due to the previously approved design guidelines under 705 without tempest countermeasures. So many existing facilities, both again 6.9 and 705, are requiring these upgrades now or in the very near future. We are working for certain three-letter agencies that are mandating this by the end of 2025. Others are saying we want to have a plan in place for you to upgrade your facilities by the end of 2025. Some of the other agencies have not taken a firm stand on existing facilities just yet, but they are enforcing tempest countermeasures with all new facilities. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that everybody on the call understands what tempest countermeasures are. Please raise your hand, create awareness if you don't, and I'll give a very quick overview, the difference between a standard 705 SCIF facility and one with tempest countermeasures, but we're really focusing on tempest countermeasures.
Greg, I do personally, but I think it would be helpful if you did a real quick overview for a few others.
Sure. So when we're adding tempest countermeasures to a SCIF facility, we're caring for not just the standard secured facility perimeter. So this is the hardened facility with the prescribed partitions and doors and ceilings and alarming. But the tempest countermeasures deal directly with RF emanations. So the ability for RF frequencies to escape the room or RF to eavesdrop on the room. And that means that any penetration into that SCIF has to be dealt with, whether it's a dielectric break whether it's a grounding, um, the hard line that they're taking now on plumbing penetration. So before, we were putting pantries and maybe toilet rooms in skiffs, no more. They don't want those drain lines to be exiting that skiff, and it's very hard to care for them um, once they exit the facility. So a lot of challenges around existing buildings where you're either making upgrades to existing skiffs or designing new skiffs. And so a lot of thought needs to go in at the front end in regards to what's there in that area as part of base building services and how do I move it out? Because the accrediting officers, they don't want it in there. If it doesn't support the skiff, it's got to be outside the skiff. And if there's absolutely no way to get it out of the skiff, then you're dealing with some really hard challenges in regards to how to deal with the RF mitigation of that infrastructure element. So again, tempest countermeasures dealing with RF frequencies and the penetration or leakage thereof. So facilities that will be impacted, it depends on the contract terms and extensions, as well as the FSO, the Facility Security Officer, and the AO, which is the accrediting officer, and their direction. So the feds have come out with a standard. The ICD 705 has been a standard in place for many, many years. But for those of us who have worked with the FSOs and the accrediting officers, we know that they all tend to like things done a specific way. The requirements, there are specific details to adhere to, but in large part, there is a number of different ways to architecture around these challenges. And so working with those accrediting officers and the facility security officers is crucial. And we're going to show you a couple ways how we deal with gaining alignment and understanding right out of the gate. So what can we do to proactively to address the potential impacts, right? So the easy ones are consider the installation and placement of all your AV and IT systems and devices in adjacent unsecured areas in their proximity to the secured boundary. Don't have anything on those walls. Before, we might share a wall with a AV monitor. Not anymore, right? Almost creating a zone by which, even if I have my cell phone on my desk outside the perimeter, some accrediting officers, they want it 10 feet away. Where you used to have cell phone lockers maybe in the vestibule going into the skiff, no more. It's the 1 meter separation there. So all of the things that we used to do in the past, Brian, is being reassessed. And so when you think about who you're working with, your engineering vendors, your contractors should be fully vetted regarding their knowledge, understanding, and current experience. Current experience is key here because there are a lot of contractors that we've dealt with that say, I've done dozens of skiffs, but they were 10 years ago. And if they haven't done it within the past 12 months, they don't know what's changed. So if they don't know, you want to make sure that your design team absolutely knows so that we can make sure that we're designing appropriately and then that we have the eyes and ears in the field to make sure that that contractor doesn't get themselves in trouble by doing something the way they used to do it versus how they need to do it. So, these are challenges that we see in working with some of our most sophisticated clients in relying on contractors that used to do a lot of their skiff work, but maybe haven't in the past 2 or 3 years. Top 5 things to consider when planning for an upgrade or a new facility. One of the most important things is early understanding on the facility construction. when you're helping your client make decisions around where to put the skiff, let them know that it doesn't start with a lease and transaction. It starts with the understanding of the infrastructure that's running through that skiff. And not that we can't overcome it, but they may pay another $50 a square foot to build it out in this location versus that location. So we push our clients for very early on due diligence support to make sure that we're making good decisions around the location and not just about, well, the landlord has this space available or the owner's building has this space available. Those things need to be taken into consideration very, very early on. Creating awareness around that, the spaces surrounding that secured facility. These will also have a cost impact on offsetting those mitigation strategies, right? Think about the adjacent tenants, right? If they're your client's tenants, much easier to deal with. If they're not, we always counsel our clients in regards to the lease language as to awareness and understanding, or even, no foreign nationals taking down space adjacent to them. That means above, below, and adjacent to them on the same floor. We always prepare a preliminary security measures document outlining the path forward. So some people will refer to this as a construction security plan. That's usually generated a little bit further down the line. But consider this as kind of a SCIF concept plan where we're identifying the secured boundary, we understand the infrastructure challenges, and then providing the high level understanding around the details of how we're going to care for that. The purpose for that is to gain alignment with the FSO and the accrediting officer so that they can, whether they'll sign off on it or not, to be determined depending on the accrediting officer, but we can gain an understanding on the step to move forward before we get into schematic design or design development, right? So we'll have these submissions along the way, but having an understanding of how we're going to care for these things, because they may try to enforce a strategy that's not achievable based on the construction type of the building. And then again, the requiring those reviews at 65% and 100% of CDs. And again, don't wait to reach an agreement and understanding. Be very, very proactive there, or else it can cost the design team a lot of money in redo and the owner a lot of money in a solution. So the construction security plan should be the second document you share with the FSO and AO. Don't rely on the on-site client to fully understand or be able to effectively lead this effort. In the work that we do collectively, we're dealing with a lot of real estate organizations or third-party project managers that may not be as savvy in SCIF design. Collectively, our team should take the lead on that. We should request the meeting. We should look to sit down with the FSO, make sure they understand it. If they're willing to have us meet with their accrediting officer, great. Sometimes they're not, but let's make sure we have a clear understanding with the FSO so that when they meet with their accrediting officer, they have a really good understanding of what we're doing. And then seek written approvals or memorandums of understanding from your client. We deal a lot in drawings. Have a Word document that goes along with that maybe references the drawing. If there's anything specific to that particular design or build out, create a bridge in communication, right? Some FSOs and accrediting officers are really good at looking at drawings. Others are not at all. So create a number of different ways to communicate that understanding. So that as we do move forward together, we don't get to a 65% submission and go, oh my gosh, we can't have you guys do this. This was not our understanding. Do everything that we can to gain that understanding. So some of the key differences between previous ICD 705 approved installations and upgraded requirements are the following. So avoid all penetrations through secured facilities that are not serving that facility. That's not necessarily a new requirement, but it is being um, enforced more rigorously, where you can move ductwork, landlord base building truck dunk out of that space, do it. Make sure you're planning on it, make sure you're capturing it in the cost. Because encapsulating it, while it is a approved strategy, if you can move it, they're pushing us to move it. If we can't move it, like let's just say on a current project I've got incoming secondary feeders from the utility feeding the base building electrical room. We could move those. We'd have to take down the entire building and infect all the tenants in that building. And so we were able to get them from requiring us to do that. But the challenge with encapsulating it doesn't change. But they would prefer us to take it out, right? Reroute it outside of our SCIF. And it's an existing SCIF that was accredited and it was never encapsulated. So when you're helping your client or that project third-party project manager or leasing agent look at space, make sure they bring us in collectively as a design team in early to help make better decisions around the placement of that SCIF and its border. So all secured facility penetration should enter in the same location and vicinity. So you have a four-sided room. We're designing for our incoming electrical, mechanical ductwork, um, any other penetrations, have them come in on the same wall. If you can, the same 10 feet of that wall. The accrediting officers want to be able to go to a single wall and inspect and not have penetrations around the entire room, even if they are RF mitigated. They want it all in one location where we can do it. That's something that hadn't been enforced previously. HVAC ducts should be provided with waveguides, and those devices need to be located within the wall penetration and fully inspectable. So when we've got those duct penetrations, whether it's base building or otherwise, we've got to make sure that where we're placing it architecturally or base building wise, based on the adjacent tenant, that we have the ability to inspect it and that those waveguides can go in the path of the wall. So recognizing that the overhead, oftentimes we have challenges overhead and we have to jog a wall over. We need to care for that appropriately based on these new requirements. All low voltage penetration shall be provided with waveguide devices. This has not been the case before. And within 6 inches of the secure perimeter. So even low voltage penetrations, whether it be ITAV solutions or fire alarm devices, they need to have waveguide devices on them as well now. They're pushing for 26 gauge sheet metal on floor deck, on elevated floors. RF foil is permitted, but they recognize that oftentimes based on sequence of construction with flooring going in at the tail end, but the inspection of the RF foil and overlap on the walls and the like goes in early. Protecting those floors has been a challenge in many construction efforts. Also, if you're laying down floor finishes directly adhere to the RF foil, if and when that floor finish is replaced or repaired, when you pull it up, you can impact the RF foil. So they're suggesting 26 gauge sheet metal. When you don't use it, put an overlay or I'll call it a floor underlayment of plywood or some other protective material that you can put your flooring on. So you don't impact that RF foil in the future.
I agree. If I can ask one question there.
Yep.
Have you been able to get them to accept the corrugated steel floor deck in lieu of that?
They're not accepting that, Brian.
That's
I
what I
have in the
found.
past. I have, and it's been a lifesaver in cost and coordination. But as of late, no.
It always struck me as kind of a redundant, you know.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why certain building types were preferable, right, where you had a steel pan deck. Um, they would never let us use it for the floor, but they would let us use it for the ceiling, for the protection above. The challenge with that is the penetrations that come through that. All window mullions shall be treated with RF foil, grounded and protected. So before we were putting foil on the windows. Now you got the foil or the film on the windows, and now you're going to have to wrap the foil from your wall around the mullion and ground the mullion. Um, Pan structures can still be used as an RF boundary, but care for pipe penetrations, hanger rods, and other base building elements. So again, Brian, we can use the pan structure for the ceiling above, but all the penetrations through that have to be now cared for with the RF mitigation. So oftentimes you're doing some foil up onto the pan as well. But depending on the AO, some will let us use that pan grounded. Others are saying, no, I want the RF foil because I want the continuity overall. Hanger rod shall be shielded down 3 inches on the hanger and around the penetration. Dielectric brakes are required on any hanging device. So even for your ceiling ACT hangers, you've got to have a dielectric brake on that hanger, and they're available. They vary in size and cost, but it is a cost, and it's more of a labor element now. Before we weren't having to do that; we were just grounding and not having to put the dielectric brake. And this is a big one. Bathrooms, kitchens, and break rooms. Avoid it in the secured perimeter. Now, if you're doing an entire floor, right, and you're doing just the perimeter, then you can make it work, but you have to look at the plumbing penetrations and how you're going to create a dielectric break more specifically on the drains than the water supply is more easier to deal with, but the drains are a bigger challenge. When you can, even if you have to create a corridor to the restrooms and have it out of the perimeter, it's easier to deal with that way.
And I think if you do, we'd recommend having some sort of wall carrier between the toilets, so and on the sink, so you've got limited penetrations. And then you'll probably need some sort of access panel because they do make wave guides for piping as well at that penetration that they're requiring.
So a rough order of magnitude on potential cost impact, right? So this is, just a general rule of thumb, right? General office baseline building, a very basic office space, $75 to $100 a square foot. 6-9 facilities were going in for 120 to 150. 705 facilities, anywhere from $150 to $250 a square foot. This is for straight office space. I'm not talking about for R&D facilities, data centers, or any of the technical spaces. With the Tempest countermeasures, you're adding easily another $50 a square foot, so in some cases up to $100 a square foot, depending on the facility that you're going into. So again, site selection is imperative. We found that when we can add expertise to the brokers who are trying to negotiate the lease for these spaces and give them a better understanding of what the build out could be and the impact of what we're going to have to do to base building systems, they're often able to get a higher tenant improvement allowance, which offsets our client's cost and creates great value as a design team. So understanding cost is something that I, am passionate about. Our team understands cost. We all have to design within budgets, We can't design within budgets if we don't know what things cost. And so I don't like to necessarily rely only on our contractors for cost insight. I like to make sure that our team has a basic understanding of that cost so that we can inform very, very early on where a client might be sitting in regards to their expectations around budget. So just coming in the home stretch here, guys, and key takeaways, right? Make sure you've got well qualified teams on the facilities, right? Your consulting partners are crucial on this, Brian, as you know. Early site due diligence is critical, understanding the overall potential impacts. A lot of people refer back to how things were done last time, and that skiff may have been built out 3 years ago, but that doesn't matter anymore. It's a different ball game now. And from what has been shared with me, the threat is very, very real, and they are taking it very, very seriously. Some of the things that we're doing, we would always do in overseas facilities, but now they're having it done here in the US. Early decision making is paramount in helping define the path forward, right? We don't want to be the team that comes in and, all of a sudden we're sideways with the FSO, the budget, or the project manager. Don't solely rely on the FSO to drive decision making. They're going to revert back to what they knew. We're consultants, we're consulting, we're informing, we're helping them better understand the constructability around these requirements. What ICD 705 and its requirements outline, and the way that they're implemented in our design of facilities are two different things. So having the team that doesn't just understand that there's this requirement, this is what it prescribes, but how do you implement those solutions in real world application? Enable documented approvals to justify decision making. Again, the way we communicate in drawings, in written documentation, in meetings, and supporting a client to enable the accrediting officer to align with how they're going to move forward so we don't get hit with a ton of construction change directives or change orders associated with an AOs requiring us to do it this way versus that way. And again, it's assume cost impacts of $50 to $150 a square foot on top of previous secured facility estimates. And that's at a minimum, right? When we're doing, clean room facilities, data center facilities that are skiffed, those numbers could be higher and likely will be higher. And I think, yep, that takes me to the end of my presentation, Brian, right? Short and sweet, a little over 30 minutes. Any questions from you or your team?
I see Tom put one in the chat there.
Yep. So, Greg, the question is about ducts and pipes conducting sound on top of RF transfer. So,
Yep.
is the question, is the sound as much of an issue as the RF? Do you want to touch
No,
on that?
well, it is, right? So you've got to have that your partitions are sound attenuated. You have RF mitigation on the pipe penetrations that would limit or minimize the sound transmission along that pipe with the dielectric brake. That dielectric brake kind of serves 2 points there. And then there are, you have your Z ducts, your acoustic Z ducts, and the like, which are also caring for that sound mitigation. That answer your question?
Yeah, that answers it. My other question would be, is there a testing or commissioning agency that comes in and does like a mock attack, and do you have to pass that to be qualified, and do you have to mitigate or fix anything that's broken?
So at the end of the project, the accrediting officer will determine what needs to be tested. But yes, you should assume that everything will be tested. When you're doing unique design solutions, you should recommend mock-ups and pre-tests. We've done this for certain types of situations in the past to assure that we're going to achieve the RF mitigation. And here's the challenge on the RF mitigation. The accrediting officers and the feds are not giving us the signals to mitigate. So we're designing around a signal that we don't know. And they're not willing to share that with us. So if you do that mock-up and you're doing it for the benefit of the accrediting officer and your client, you want to get that specific information so that you can test appropriately.
Great, thanks.
Tom, another comment just on noise mitigation. I've been on a project where we had a skiff consultant and they had recommended sound transducers on all of the duct supply and return. And those literally just vibrate the sheet metal so that no noise can go through. But they also required sound transducers on all of the exterior windows of the space as well. So, every project is unique and different.
Right.
Yeah, just another tidbit on that.
Yeah, I've had a lot of projects that had like curtain wall or whatever, and it is amazing how much sound transfers through that, or vibration of tapping or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're spot on also about not necessarily believing the FSO on site.
Right.
I've seen a lot of that. And the biggest mystery is what the AO may or may not tweak or accept. That's always the biggest challenge.
And that's why, Brian, we spent a lot of time early on in every project, making sure that we're aligned with the basis of design. On these skiff facilities, we're creating an early document that includes the details, the design details that will be used to mitigate and gain approvals. And so when you have that, doesn't mean that the FSO or the accrediting officer down the line can't change their mind, but they're less likely to with early engagement and alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had, some of our clients push back on the FSO and the accrediting officer and say, show it to me in writing. And then they don't, because they really don't have a leg to stand on in requiring that. And when they don't show it in writing, then it comes down to, okay, well, if you're not going to show it in writing, we're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll say, well, then we're not going to give it approval, right? But at least our team has done everything that we can to help gain that understanding. And so, Brian, I don't know how much I understand you do a fair amount of skiff work. There is a tremendous opportunity ahead of us collectively as a team to drive support and understanding. These upgrades, these requirements that are coming down aren't necessarily being talked about much for two reasons as I see it. One, the security teams are working behind the scenes to make some of these upgrades. The real estate teams aren't necessarily aware of it yet. And two, nobody wants to talk about it because it hasn't been mandated. They're getting it, the clients that we're working with who are upgrading their facilities are on based on current contracts that they have. And others are taking a proactive measure based on client relationships to get ahead of it. But at the moment, we're in the midst of somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 square feet of skiff upgrades associated with these new requirements.
Yeah, that's very timely. There's a couple kind of test fit exercises right now on our boards, and just getting wildly different feedback from the FSOs and the brokers involved. So this kind of helps level set.
Good.
And I think one other thing to kind of be cognizant of when test fitting these spaces is the size that your electrical rooms need to be. when you add this tempest countermeasure, right, you need to, like Greg said, you need to filter everything. You're filtering fire alarm, you're filtering power, you're filtering generator power if that's a separate incoming source. So all of your distribution needs to be from within the boundary, and it takes up a lot of wall space.
Yeah.
That's often something that we've been challenged with, kind of like after test fits have been approved by clients and then we get brought in, is being like, well, your electrical room's nowhere near as
Yeah.
large as it needs to be. And then also on a dollars perspective, just every new source of power, so normal generator or UPS, those all need their own dedicated panels. Those all need their own dedicated filters. Fire alarm needs a filter. You need to bring, controls wiring via fiber. That it's not as simple as it was prior.
And some of these filter banks can be bigger than
In a panel.
commercial refrigerator,
Yeah.
right? So the amount of space needed is tremendous.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, what is there anything else we can do for you or your team at the moment, Brian?
Not at the moment. I think, as you said, there's a lot of activity, so I'm sure we'll be able to partner up here at some point. But very, very good input here, and appreciate it.
You bet. Well, feel free to reach out to Dan or Drew when you have needs and opportunities. And certainly they'll bring in the right folks from around the company. We have practice leaders that drive science and tech. Again, Ray, technical advisory services. We have the BMS and energy optimization practice lead. And then I think you've met Jimmy Sneed, who runs our data center critical facilities practice as well.
Very good.
Okay. All right.
Appreciate it.
Well,
Awesome.
thank you guys. Appreciate the time today.
Thanks
You
all.
got it.
Thank
Thanks
you.
Enjoy
again.
the
Thanks,
short week.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See ya.
Brian. Thanks, Greg.
Yep.
See you guys.